Ralph Velasco is a travel organizer, photographer, former restaurant owner. Very interesting past and what he does now with travel. He's traveled to 5 continents. He arranges tours. He's got great tips on what to do when you travel. He's got a great podcast on YouTube called Continental Drifter. It's very, very interesting. We share tips on some of the fears a lot of Americans have of going to Europe and going to Asia. Really, really interesting interview and discussion about just traveling, some tips to get around, not only domestically but internationally. I share some what happened in my youth when my father sent me to Italy at 10 years old by myself, and some tips that I've seen. And Ralph's got a lot of great insight on tours and what to do and the culture and the cultural awareness. Many of us go to countries and we're not careful about how we should only be perceiving and be part of, and not do anything to deter that at all. But traveling, great conversation with Ralph Velasco. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. So, where in the world do we find you, Mr. Ralph Velasco?
In Rockford, Illinois. Rockford.
Because you're a Chicago boy,
Yeah,
right? But you are something that you say that I long to be: location independent.
that's right. Yep, I'm leaving on Thursday for a couple months.
Wow.
So when I'm in between trips, I stay with family here in Chicagoland.
And where are you going for a couple of months?
Yeah, I'm starting out in Spain for about 3 weeks. I'll be in Puglia, Italy. I'll be then in the Dordogne region of France, and these are 3 group trips.
Wow.
Then after that, I'm doing Armenia and Georgia with a group. And then after that, I hope to either go to Greece or possibly Sicily.
My goodness. Is
Yeah.
this a typical stint?
Yeah, it is when there's not a pandemic. So this is the first time I'm traveling like this in about close to 2 years.
Wow.
But I've had a couple. I just did 2 back-to-back trips to Costa Rica with groups, and I went to Nicaragua, did some scouting, went to Turkey. So I've gotten around a little bit, but this is my I'm going nuts with these 4 trips back to back like this.
A
It,
good friend of mine just came back from Turkey. He raved about it.
yeah, it's wonderful.
That's what
Had the
everybody
best time.
says.
I was there for 2 months last October, November.
Wow.
Yeah, I was there for 2 months. Yeah,
Wow. So
supposed to
you're
go for 3 weeks, and then I extended it because I was having such a great time.
everybody loves it there. Everybody says great things. So you're a travel expert, obviously. You're a photographer. Your photographs on Instagram are just stunning, just
Thank
stunning.
you.
You're a tour organizer. You used to own restaurants. Your story about how you kind of went into the finance industry and then it kind of came to an end and you kind of made this full time. Tell us about it, please. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so I've started out doing a lot of different things. I often joke that I it might be easier to tell you what I haven't done than what I have done over my career. But no, I've owned several restaurants, and I finally became a financial advisor. I was looking for a way to get back out to Southern California to start my walking tours, photo walking tours. And a friend of mine said, "Well, why don't you come out and work for me?" He was a financial advisor, and get my licenses, and at least I'd have a job when I got out there and started this business. And so little by little, I did that and did it for 3 years from 2005 to 2008. And then we had the financial crisis in September of 2008. And that was actually the best thing ever happened to me,
Really?
even though I was a financial advisor. But that was the kick in the pants that I needed to do this full time, and kind of burn the boats, and no looking back. I had to make it work.
So there's a travel reference. Cortez used to burn the boat so he couldn't go back to Spain. Very, very interesting that term. But you were owned restaurants, and you say you wanted to get back to Southern California to continue walking tours. How do you go from restaurants to doing this kind of tours?
Well, I grew up in the restaurant. Excuse me. I grew up in the restaurant industry. I'm a third generation restaurateur in Chicago, and out of college, I had a Chicago hot dog stand, which is not a cart. Some people think I'm standing on the corner with a cart, although my grandfather did that.
Hmm.
But I had a small 27-seat restaurant in my hometown, and I loved it. It was a nice little moneymaker, and great food, and it was kind of right up my alley. And that I ended up selling that, and then I took a round the world trip for 5 months back when I
Wow.
was 24, and went to like 15 countries on 5 continents, and that was an amazing adventure, as you can imagine. This was 1988, before the internet, before cell phones, practically before the wheel. And but that was a great experience, as you can imagine. And then I came back and I did some real estate, and some other things. Moved out to California for the first time and worked for a friend of mine in his restaurant business. And boy, oh boy, a lot of different things. Ended up moving to Mexico City to get my MBA, because I felt like I wanted to catch up with my cohorts, because I'd always been entrepreneurial and kind of didn't have that big business experience. Turns out that doesn't mean a whole lot,
Hmm.
anyway. But I moved down there, and ended up moving back to moved to San Diego to finish up my degree there, where the school was based. And and then I did a couple other things. Then I moved back to Chicago, and that's when I opened my second restaurant. And I had that for 3 years. I was coming to the end of my 3-year lease, and I had to decide, was I going to sign for another 5 years, or am I going to do something different? And so I literally took a pad of yellow paper, and on the left side I wrote the pros, and on the right side the cons of what I was doing. And the cons were, I had to have employees. I had to have a physical space that was very expensive, and that rent came due every single month. And I was feeding people something that could make them sick, and so a lot of different things like that. And I said I want to do the opposite of those. I don't want employees. I want to work for myself. I want to work wherever I am, which at that time, 2003, 4 was, of course, people were doing it for centuries, but it was kind of a new I don't even think that digital nomad, or that term location independent, was a thing yet. And but I knew I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted that freedom of being an entrepreneur and kind of working from wherever I was, because that $5,000 rent came due every single month, and
Wow.
whether business was good or bad. And so I kind of decided that the way to do this was, maybe create these walking tours, these photo walking tours. People were starting to get digital cameras; those were just a new thing. And so I figured, well, I bet people would be interested in learning how to use these new digital devices. And at the time, I was living in Chicago, beautiful city for walking tours and photography. But of course, we've got the winter, and
Yeah, for about 5 months. Yeah, 4 or 5 months.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a big chunk out of your year, if you're trying to do, make a living. So that's when I decided to figure out how to get back to Southern California where I could do this year round.
Very interesting. So it really started with walking tours. But I mean, I watch your videos and you are in Morocco, you're like you mentioned, in different parts of Europe, I mean, you're all over the world. And uh like here's a question, and I see one of your points are cultural awareness. How important is it that, when Americans specifically, we go to these places and we have to understand their culture. We don't want to disrupt it. We want to observe.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important. We go to these places, and you're right. I want to immerse myself in the place. I want to take in their culture. I don't want to somehow try to impart my culture on them. And so that's what I try to do with my trips and my tours is encourage my clients, let's go there, let's immerse ourselves in this place, learn about it. Sure, we're maybe going to find some things that aren't like they are back home,
Mhm.
but that's why we travel. And, let's not try to change the place. And, because a lot of times you see things, you're like, well, why don't they do it this way? Why don't they do it our way? And, well, we're not there to change it. This culture probably has been around for a lot longer than the US, and we don't know how to do everything perfectly. So let's go there and absorb the culture instead of trying to impart ours on someone else.
Very important fact. I think a lot of Americans, they're so used to traveling in the U.S. where things are similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. And how important? I mean, can you truly, or should I ask it this way, to get a deeper knowledge of the culture? Language is part of it, and knowing and understanding their language is part of it. But it'll be hard for Americans, obviously, to make that change. We're not subjected to languages like Europeans are, where they're so close. But to truly get inside and understand a culture, you should know at least some of the language. Would you agree?
Yeah, and a lot of the places that I go to, it's virtually impossible to learn more than just a couple words. I mean, Cambodia, Republic of Georgia, so many India, so many different places. But if you can learn the basics, thank you, hello, nice to meet you, how are you, the numbers from 1 to 10, can I have a beer,
Where's the
all the
bathroom?
basics,
Yeah.
and if people see that you're making an effort to try to speak their language, they're extremely friendly. And, so, and if you have an opportunity, if you're going to be in a place for a period of time and perhaps you're moving to a place, certainly makes sense to start taking some classes and using some different apps that may help you to learn the language. Really important. But, um, I think sometimes people use that as an excuse not to travel
Hmm.
is that, I don't speak the language. So how I can't go to this place. Well, I don't speak the language in 90% of the countries that I go to, but it's not going to keep me from going there. And even if the people don't speak a whole lot of English, there's so many different international languages with, sign language and just hand gestures and things like that. I've gotten by everywhere around the world, no problem. So to me, that's part of the fun of
Heck, there's parts in the US that I don't understand the language. But and there are some cultures who actually perhaps get a little offended if you don't at least try in the language. I know Paris kind of has that reputation. What are your feelings on that?
Yeah, I think there might be some people around the world that I think it's because I think the French do get a bad rap when it comes to that, but I try to put myself in their position. If I if I'm sitting in my restaurant, 10, 20 years ago, and someone comes in and they just start speaking whatever their language is from back home, how could they possibly expect me to know that language?
Right.
And I think it's very presumptuous of us to go in somewhere and just start blabbering out in English, assuming that everyone speaks our language. Yes, it's probably the language of business around the world. A lot of people do speak English. We're very, very lucky to have been born into the English language, and because many, many people want to learn English. I think it's the language of business. I try to encourage the little kids that I meet, especially around the world, to learn English, help them with different words, because I think that's one of the best ways that people can advance themselves is to learn English, because it is the language of business and it is so widely spoken. But we can't just assume that people speak our language. And so that's another phrase that I'll learn is, do you speak English
Hmm.
in their language? Parlez-vous français? So many different ways that you can learn that. And then that just shows the person. It's like someone coming into my restaurant and saying, do you speak Arabic or something? And, I would say, no, I don't. I'm sorry. And, we just continue the conversation somehow.
And most Europeans can tell an American a mile away. So, some, they make that presumption. So, why are so many Americans hesitant to go to Europe or to go to non-English speaking countries? Is it purely the language? Is it also the culture? Is there a stigma? Do you see that?
I think it's the news.
Hmm.
You watch the news at all, and I was in Cairo about, I think it was 2010, and I brought a group there. And it was wonderful. Egypt was fantastic. Talk about
Hmm.
history, incredible. Then we had the Arab Spring. I believe that was spring of 2011. And I was invited to speak at a conference in Cairo that following December. So like 13 months after I had just been there. And when I got there, I was wondering whether I should go, because you watch the news and Egypt is on
Chaos.
fire.
Yeah, it looks
It's
like
on
it.
fire.
Yeah.
When I got there, because I decided to go, I did research and I looked at it. And when I got there, we went to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which is right next to, um, is it Tahrir Square, I believe, is the name of the main square there, which was where you saw the demonstrations and things. I'm sorry if I'm wrong there, but it's right next to it. And there was some demonstrations out there. There was people with picket, signs and stuff like that. But if you had looked at the news, you would have thought the whole country was on fire.
Wow.
And that's just not the case. Even, I'm looking at going to Greece this fall, and everyone I tell is like, "Oh, isn't Greece on fire? Aren't they having terrible trouble with fires there?" And if yes, it's a problem, but and I'm totally guessing, but I'll bet if 1 or 2% of the country is actually affected by that, it's probably a lot. So we people watch the news, and I think they just make these assumptions instead of doing any kind of research, and they talk themselves out of it. And I think it's a real shame, because they talk about missed opportunities. And going to Egypt after the Arab Spring, when tourism was down 95%, was fantastic.
Really?
Could you imagine? I was there 13 months earlier, and the Egyptian Museum, which is where King Tut's tomb is, and everything, all these incredible antiquities and treasures. You were kind of side by side. You couldn't barely look at something. It was so crowded. The next 13 months I was there later, we were the only 9 people in the whole museum.
Hmm.
It was fantastic. So that's the way I look at it. I think it's an opportunity.
Even if we see in the news pictures of California these days, there's
Yep.
fires, there's mudslides. You would think, the whole state is is engulfed, and obviously
Yep.
that's not the case. So I was pretty fortunate. My father was an Italian immigrant, and so third third grade, first day of summer, he gives me a suitcase and says, "Put your clothes in here." I'm in New Haven, Connecticut. So he proceeds to take me to the bus stop in New Haven, tells the bus driver to drop me off Terminal 1 at JFK, gives me a picture of my grandmother, gives me a plane ticket, and gives me a bus ticket. So 10 years old, with a suitcase, I get to JFK, I find somebody, I get on, I'm guessing TWA. I fly to Milan. I meet my grandmother. I meet my uncle, and I'm there for 11 weeks. And so I proceed to do this every other summer. I mean, imagine now my father would probably be arrested, right? If he sent the 10-year-old. But
That's an unbelievable story,
yeah,
Joey. That's amazing.
yeah, he didn't even bring me to the airport. He just put me on a bus, and
Wow.
so I would spend many, many summers there. I knew the language a little bit, but you get to know it more when nobody speaks English or very few. And met all my cousins and all my aunts and uncles, and got submerged in southern Switzerland and southern Italy with the culture and everything. And language was a big part of it. So it shaped my childhood and my adulthood, just knowing how others live. And I just don't think a lot of Americans see that. They summer somewhere else in the US, maybe at a lake or something, or
Yeah.
not too far, but they don't really experience Europe like that.
No, that's an unbelievable story, Joey. I love it. Yeah, I was exposed to travel fairly young. My parents used to take us down to Mexico every other year or so, and I had grandfather, grandmother that lived down there. So that was kind of my first foray into international travel. But by myself, at 15, I studied in Spain for a summer.
Wow.
And then the next summer, I was a volunteer in Peru with my high school. The next summer, I volunteered in Venezuela.
Oh my
And the
goodness.
next summer, I studied in Mexico City. Now I'm 15 to 17, 18 years old, so quite a bit older than 10. But that was me traveling on my own. My parents were very open and glad for me to travel like that. They knew it was probably the best education you could possibly get. And I don't have any children, but my cousins do, and they're high school age, and my sister and stuff. And so I do nothing but encourage them to take these study abroad programs. I mean, talk about an opportunity, just wonderful. And unfortunately, a couple of their children got hit by COVID. Or
Mm.
not that they got it, but their programs were interrupted by COVID, and so they had to come home after like a couple weeks instead of staying for 4 or 6 months. But yeah, I think international travel is the best education anyone can get.
Absolutely. And you did all that traveling by yourself? Did you have a cousin or wow.
Well, I wasn't with my parents, but I was with
Oh,
groups
with
like
groups.
my high school,
I see.
and a volunteer group. Yeah, yeah.
Very, very interesting. And yeah, just the culture and the education you get, you get, and I mentioned the language before. Even I'll just say this: the way the Italians specifically, just the way they swear, it's just very different from the way we swear, and it's really part of you know of the way they communicate, of the way they live, and I would love to get that experience in another country, but it's just not going to be possible. There, of course, technology makes it a little easier. There's plenty of translator, Google Translate, and Duolingo, which I use now, and to refresh myself in Italian. I plan on going back next summer, but just the culture itself is so important to so many Americans, I believe, and I think they'd be better for it.
No doubt about it. Just being exposed to other cultures, seeing how other people live, learn how they think. A lot of other cultures revere their older people, their elderly, much differently than we do.
Mm,
And so learning how that works and just getting a different perspective. If you don't go anywhere, all you know is where you are. And so I think that every time we travel, we learn something and that becomes a part of us. And you can't help but, have that adjust your perspective a little bit to, I think, make you a better person,
Yeah,
a more
certainly more
well-rounded person.
well-rounded. Yeah, that's what to
Yeah.
say. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I
Hmm.
know that whenever I'll see what you think of these tips, but people ask me, in Italy, I always say two tips. One is that when you're looking for something to eat, ask the cops because the concierge, the cab drivers, they all get paid. They all get influenced somehow, and they'll drive. And so the cops have no money in it, and generally they're nice and they'll give you good advice. And the second tip is if you're going to get wine, get it in the carafe. It's local. It's probably better than
Yes.
what you're going to get in the bottle, and it's going to be less expensive. What are your thoughts on those?
Love it. I love it. Yeah, I'm all for the house wine. It's almost always the best. It's fresher, which, with wine maybe doesn't mean it's better necessarily, but it's certainly the price is right. There's plenty of it. They're not going to serve you a bad wine. So I think that's a great tip. And yeah, cops absolutely. Go to the places where the menu is not in English.
Mm.
Go to places where it's on a chalkboard and it changes every day,
Ah,
so that it's fresh, it's what's available. Go in and say, uh, you know, let me have it. Whatever's the specialty of this area of the day, I'm in for it, and just accept it, whatever it is, whatever it looks like, because it's gonna be great. And so I'm one of those people that I'll try anything twice, especially when it comes to food. And so I and I it's funny. I watch some of these travel shows with these professional chefs and cooks and things, and sometimes they're wherever they are, and I won't name names, but this one particular one, he'll get they'll give him the local specialty or a different thing that he's never tried or a local liqueur or a hard liquor, and he'll like spit it out or act like he's gonna throw up or something. I'm like,
really?
that is so uncool, that it's so culturally unaware. And this is an internationally renowned chef. And I think part of it is maybe he does it for effect or
Mm, mm,
something, but
mm.
I just can't believe that he has this big travel show and does those kinds of things. I think it's very rude.
Absolutely. We talked about language. Food is just as important, or maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way my relatives in southern Italy eat. I mean, it's truly, farm to table, and
Yeah.
they walk. Nobody's overweight, but they eat, and there's always bread and wine at every meal, and they just enjoy it. They take their time, and they argue and they laugh and it's just the way they eat is so. When I tell them preposterous things like, there's coffee cups in the car and they drink coffee while you're driving, and they say, what, why would you do that? And they just don't get it.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I find myself falling back into that when I come back to the States.
Mm,
And the one thing that I'm looking forward to in these next couple months of travel that I've coming up is the food and the farm to table, the freshness, the actual taste of it, the coffee, the locally made wine and beer. That's what I'm looking forward to. Unfortunately, sometimes food is just something that I have to have
right.
when I'm here in the States. I do it and then I
Here.
wait until I'm starving and I eat whatever I can find. And that's just not healthy.
Extremely not healthy. My
Yeah.
father's village in Italy, I I remember they go boar boar hunting. They call it
Mm.
cinghiale, So they caught one that everybody was excited. We're going to have this tonight, and somebody else gets something and they share it and they kind of barter, and yeah, just the way they treat food is just so different. Now, when you do your tours, do groups come to you and tell you what you want, or do you kind of create it and then invite?
I have done it the second part. So I create a tour. I go to places typically that I'm interested in because I think I need to be interested in it to be able to sell other people on joining me. And so I go to places that I'm interested in, and I'll almost always go there and scout first. So I'll go to the place by myself with a
Ah,
local guide, with my local tour operator in the place, see everything, try everything, meet all the hotel and restaurant owners and service providers, guides, things like that. And I'll see two or three times the amount of um, stuff that we'll actually do on the tour, because as a single person or with a guide, I can do them a lot quicker. And,
right.
I don't need to be 2 hours at a museum necessarily. Not that we do a lot of museums on my trips. I kind of leave that for free time. But, any activity I just want to get a taste of it. And so I might do 6 activities in a day instead of the two that we'll do with the group for a longer period of time. And then I put together the trip, that a trip that makes sense logistically and is most efficient, and gives variety. um, I just created this new brand called a la campagna experiences. I don't know if you found that on my websites in your research, but as you probably know, as an Italian American, a la campagna means to the countryside,
Yes.
and Campania is actually my mother's maiden name.
Hmm.
And so it's a bit of an homage to her as well. But these tours are about going to the countryside and staying in private agriturismos, uh, private castles, wonderful boutique hotels, um, former villas, homes, and things like that, and really experiencing the place in depth and not moving around so much.
Hmm.
For longer periods of time, because I do, and I've done trips in the past where we'll go for 14 days and we'll see, 5 or 6 different places for 2 or 3 nights, and they're great, and you get to see a lot, but you only see a little of a lot.
Right.
And so as I mature and travel more and more, I prefer to see less but more in depth,
Right.
and really get into the culture, learn about it. These properties are destinations in and of
Hmm.
themselves. Usually, you're like, okay, I can't wait to get out of the hotel because I'm traveling. I don't want to be at the hotel. Well, when you're staying at an 11th century castle and it's like a museum, you might be more willing to stay there. And there's a swimming pool, and I mean, just because I think when we travel, we tend to want to just see and do everything, and I can understand that because I used to be like that.
Right.
But I think as I travel more, now I'm more about just immersing myself and having, taking it in almost by osmosis, and being in that one place longer.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And you get the hotels, you arrange transportation, you buy plane tickets and
Only if there's internal flights, which on the a la Campagna trips, there's usually not, because, like I said, they're more
mm,
concentrated on smaller areas, one, maybe two locations. But on certain trips, like my Cambodia trip, we have an internal flight. But I don't arrange the flights to and from the destination. I tell people, where they should be when. Like, we usually have a welcome dinner the first evening. Try to arrive by 3 p.m. that day on whatever flight, come in early. We can arrange extra hotel nights, but people want to use different airlines. They're coming from different places around the
right.
world. They want to go first class, back of the bus, whatever. And so I let them, the frequent flyer miles, whatever. So I let them arrange that with my instruction.
Cambodia, so I know a family from Cambodia. That sounds wonderful.
One of my favorite destinations. It really is. So one place that I didn't know too much about, and then one of my clients slash friends of mine says, I got to take you to Cambodia. I've been there 10 times. We got to go." I said, "Okay, let's go." And so I went, and I fell in love with it. Just wonderful. The food is off the charts. The people are amazing. The photography is wonderful. The ancient sites like Angkor Wat
Right.
are just top of the line. As great as the Great Pyramids and the Eiffel Tower or anything else that you can possibly compare it to. It's right up there. 1,200 years old. So just outstanding, and the people are just wonderful. And I do these things called tuk-tuk adventures, and I rent these tuk-tuks, and it's kind of like a motorcycle on the front of a four seats in the back that people facing each other, and it's a very popular form of transportation in that part of the world. And so I rent these tuk-tuks for us, and we just go out into the countryside and see what we can see. And if we see something interesting, we pull over, and almost 100% of the time the people are, welcome us into their home,
Wow.
show us their way of life, what they're doing. To me, that's the best part of travel.
How about on elephants? Is that like in Thailand? Do you ever do that?
Yeah, we've done the elephants in India
Yeah.
and Cambodia. I'm a little bit on the fence about that activity these days as I learn more about it.
Mm,
And so it's something that I've made optional for people, but we did used to include it. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest with you, because you never know how the animals are being
right.
treated. And so I let people make that decision themselves. So I'm trying not to include that kind of an activity on our trips.
Would there be well, let's go right into that. Are there other activities or even countries that you've been to that you won't recommend any longer?
Um, no, not really. I mean, there's certainly trips that I've done and don't do now because I can only do 8 or 10 trips a year myself, and I lead all my trips. Um, and but I want to go to these places. I mean, I want to go to new places, and so I've done Morocco 7 or 8 times.
Mm.
I've done a lot of countries many, many times, and it's kind of like, okay, been there, done that. Let's create a new itinerary. So I keep my interest, and I need to appeal to my clients as well, because I have some clients that have been on 15 or 20 of my trips,
Wow.
and they want to, they want something new. And so I'm creating new itineraries for them as well. So it really just depends. But as far as a place that kind of like I've done a trip and wouldn't go back, I can't really think of any that are like that.
You've been to New Zealand and Australia?
I have not with groups. That was part of my round the world trip that I
Oh,
did
that's
way
right.
back in 1988. So I did go there. Yeah, wonderful places.
I hear, yeah, I hear wonderful. And you've got these great kind of short videos on their YouTube channel where you kind of give tips. I was watching the passport one, just kind of backing up all your documents. I mean, there's another, we hear about these accident or, mistakes, people lose their passport and things like that. And perhaps another reason why a lot of Americans don't like to travel, but you just have to make backup and you have to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd be street smart. And I knock on wood, I've never lost a passport. I've never gotten pickpocketed. I've never had any kind of a major issue happen to me while traveling. And so I think part of that is, maybe luck, but it's also being aware and minimizing those opportunities for the thieves or for bad things to happen to
Mm.
you, whether it's someone else to do it to you or not. Planning ahead, doing research, and these tips that I call them my 2 minute travel tips. Some of them are longer than 2 minutes, but I like to think there's a lot of good information there. And their tips, some of them I've had to learn the hard way.
Mm.
Other ones are just like, gosh, I just automatically I diversify all my stuff. I got a passport in this pocket. I've got my ID in this pocket with, credit cards in that pocket, a little bit of cash in this one. It just makes sense. Pickpocket's not going to like go into 4 or 5 different pockets. They can only get into one pocket quickly at a time. So all they can get is, let's say 20% of my stuff. So I'll tell a quick story. I was traveling with an ex and a girlfriend a long time ago, and she had showed me that she had her credit cards, passport, driver's license, money. I think even uh, what do you call traveler's checks back then. in this one portfolio, and she put it in her backpack. Girls were used to wear these backpack purses back
Sure.
then. And I said, "Are you sure you want to have all that in one place? And maybe give me your passport and I'll put it here, and you put your cash there." She said, "No, no, don't tell me how to travel. I know how to travel." So, okay. Well, sure enough, we're walking around and I see her backpack zipped open. And I said, "Did you know that your backpack's open?" She goes, "What are you talking about?" She takes it off. Sure enough, that portfolio is gone. And they got everything in one fell swoop
Right.
because she had everything. And there's the old adage, and sometimes I believe this, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. That makes a lot of sense, but she obviously wasn't watching her basket. And the kind of funny thing is that we think that it actually happened inside a church
Oh, wow.
where you would least expect it. You let your guard down. You're maybe bumping up against people, and you're more forgiving if someone does bump up against you. And we think that that's probably where it happened. So you never know.
What a shame.
So I'm more about diversifying.
Right. Makes perfect sense. Ralph, what's going to happen to the cruise industry?
Well, I think they will come back. I think there's a lot of people that like that kind of travel. I've only been on a big cruise one time, and that was with about 30 family members 25 years ago. We had some sort of celebration, and it was fun. But that amount of people concentrated in one place for long periods of time. Um, I think it's people like to travel that way. So I think we have short memories. After I don't know 3 or 5 years, I think I'm hoping that this COVID, I think we're always going to have to live with some form of COVID.
Yeah.
And so that's why we just need to kind of get back to travel and get back to our lives safely. But, that kind of travel it's tough. I love river cruises.
Mm.
I've done some river cruises with groups, and we've done the Danube and the Rhine, I believe. But what a great, this way you're only with maybe 125 people, and you're not off at sea for, overnight or something where you can't see anything. You're right in a river where, you look out and there's beautiful
Hmm.
castles and scenery all around you almost all the time. And they go through the interesting parts during the day, and they go through the less interesting parts and the locks and things like that at night. And, they've got it wired, and the food is incredible. So I don't know. I think there's a certain sector of people will always want to do cruises, but I've got to think that with those kinds of fixed costs that they have, it's going to be difficult for them for a while.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Do you ever set up golf trips?
I have not done golf trips. I do have a very good friend of mine who does golf trips, and that's his specialty. I have my best friend just he goes on golf trips, and he told me that he probably won't go again because these guys go to wonderful places. Like the last one he did was Spain and Portugal. He said it was a 10-day trip. We golfed 9 days. All I saw was the inside of the van getting from one place to the next,
Wow.
the club, the golf course for 5 or 6 hours, and then next thing I knew, we were on our way to the next place because they must have gone to 5 different locations throughout Spain and Portugal. And I'm like, God, I could see golfing once or twice over that period, and then seeing the culture and food and things like that. He said all I saw was golf courses,
I
and
did.
in some places I could have been anywhere.
That's right. Yeah, you could have
Yeah,
been in in Phoenix.
yeah, exactly.
I usually hear golf trips in Ireland and in the UK. I seldom hear them in Portugal and Spain.
There's a lot of golf courses there, beautiful courses, especially in
Yeah,
the south, for sure.
very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So so if Americans, do they realize that there's services like yours? By the way, you got a great podcast, Continental Drifter, with what a great name. What a great name. And you know, I think people like yourself that are providing these kinds of service to make it create this kind of buffer, that helps them in these countries. I think it's a great cause, and we always hear about these tour groups and everything, but we always kind of picture, like you said, 50, 60 people in a bus and being moved around, and not a lot of time in between. But these kind of personal ones, are they becoming more popular?
I really think they are. Yeah, like you said, these big bus tours, man, especially now. And what I will say, I mentioned the a la campagna experiences that
Yeah.
I created. I started this brand maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and this was before COVID. But I unintentionally think that I was ahead of the curve for COVID because, like I say, these are smaller groups staying in one or two locations, not moving around in a common vehicle for 6 or 8 hours like we might on the Morocco trip or some of my other trips. And I think people are going to be less interested in doing that these days, where they're
Hmm.
stuck in a closed vehicle for 6 or 8 hours with some strangers. And my groups are only anywhere from 4 to 10 people. And it's funny because I've been doing this so long now, 14
Hmm.
years, so many of my people know each other from different trips.
Ah,
It's really fantastic because they become really good friends. I become really good friends with them. And for me, it's more like traveling with friends than with
right.
clients. But they know each other from different trips. And it's like, yeah, I went to Iceland with Ralph. Well, I went to, Central Europe, and, you ought to go on the Iceland trip or blah, blah, blah. So they start selling each other on the different trips, which is unexpected. But yeah, so these smaller groups are just wonderful. And I think there's a lot more people doing them. I think it's getting more competitive for the new companies that, new people that are trying to do this. I think I got in at the perfect time 14 years ago when like I said, I started doing this full time 14 years ago. And so that was kind of before social media really hit. And now, though, with social media, if someone's got a big following, you could probably fill up a trip pretty quickly
Hmm.
because all you need is 6 or 8 people. But and it looks like the absolute most fantastic job in the world, and it really is. But it's a job and it's work, and there's a lot of moving parts. I'm getting ready for these 4 trips coming up in September, and right now we're in late August, and these are back to back to back to back trips without a day off in between.
Wow.
And I never would normally do that, but it's because of COVID that 2 of those trips got moved from this past spring or even last fall, and I was able to kind of shoehorn them in between other trips because normally I always try to have at least 2 to 3 days off in between for myself, but also just to get one from one place to another. And so, but it, as you can imagine, when you're traveling by yourself or for with your family, and you think about the logistics of, just your planes, trains, and automobiles, and then you got to think about, 4 groups to go into 5 different countries with different, insurance now and COVID restrictions and QR codes and stuff. It's it's a lot. It's a rat's nest of stuff. But back to your point, that's why people choose, group leaders like me because
Right.
they don't have to figure that out. Part of my job is figuring that out and then getting that across to my people, telling them what they have to do. Otherwise you have to research that all that stuff yourself. But I get a lot of single women on my trips,
Hmm.
and they're not necessarily not married, but they're just by themselves. Perhaps their husband or spouse partner doesn't travel or is working for whatever reason, and they want to have, they want to know that everything's laid out for them.
Right.
All the plans are made, that they're with a group, strength in numbers,
Safety.
safety in
Yeah.
numbers. So I think that's really appealing. And also, I'll say that people are more and more interested in learning a skill
Hmm.
when it comes to travel. Um, you know, Pretty much any of us can, set up a trip where we sit on the beach for 7 days, whatever, for ourselves. But when you're talking about moving around a country, perhaps you want to learn photography.
Mm.
You want to learn about cooking or some other specialty, a language, yoga. There's these special interest trips that I think is really kind of a relatively new thing. I mean, they've been going on for a long time, but I think it's getting more and more popular.
Very, very cool. And do you do any tours in the US domestically?
I started out, of course, doing my
Sure.
U.S. tours here. I would used to do like 2 hour sit across the table from someone and teach them how to use their camera.
Hmm.
Or I would do walking tours in the local neighborhood in Southern California. Then I expanded to half day tours. Then we'd go to Joshua Tree National Park or Death Valley for the weekend. And it just kept expanding. Then I started bringing groups back to Chicago so that I could get a free ride back to Chicago. And I've done that 12 or 14 times now. So during COVID, I actually did a couple Chicago tours. I did a Milwaukee tour, which Milwaukee is a fantastic city
Hmm.
that a lot of people don't think about. Wonderful place. And but I tend to do mostly international trips because that's really my interest. I don't do too many here in the U.S. anymore.
We were in Charleston, South Carolina. We hired a tour guide, and it just enriches the experience so much more. You just learn about so much of the history and the culture, and take us to neighborhoods that, I mean, your skills are often underrated. We need to be able to trust people like you that do that groundwork, so we can enjoy the experience of wherever we're traveling.
Absolutely. And I also recommend for people that don't go on group trips, and not everyone does or is interested. I think they should try it. But I think as soon as we think about a group tour, like you said, we think about this 40 or 50
Mm,
person bus. And to me, that's a nightmare. But for some people, they like that because those are usually very inexpensive,
right.
but they're inexpensive for a reason. I prefer to create a more high end, a little bit more pricey tour, but you're paying for a lot of value. But the talking about the small groups, and I got lost on my train of thought. I'm sorry.
But
But
yeah, just hiring experts like yourself to
oh,
help with, yeah, with
exactly. So
traveling.
what I recommend for people, and oftentimes we forget, is that in some places you can hire a local guide, perhaps with a car, or at least that you can meet them at some meeting point and then they can take you around a city via public transportation. They know it, because you get to a place, even me, and I've traveled all over the world, and I get to the local metro and I may not know how to get a ticket.
Right.
How does this box work? Because it's in a different language. Sure, I could probably change it to English, but how do I even find that button? It's daunting. But you go with a local guide, and oftentimes they'll even have a car, and you can hire a guide in some places for 6 or 8 hours with a car for 50 or
Yeah.
$75.
So we did.
That is the best money you will ever spend
Absolutely.
because they're going to get you to places you never would have found. They know the language, they know the culture, they'll answer all your questions. Tell them exactly. I'm not interested in museums or monuments. I want to meet the local artisans, or I want to go to that off the beaten path place for, what's the specialty food here? I want to try that. Or how do they make the local cheese, or the local, hooch, the, white lightning, whatever it is, because every country's got theirs.
Sure.
And they're going to show you those things. To me, that's the wonderful thing about travel.
Very, very cool. You got great tips on your site. I remember I was watching ABC, always be charging. You got to keep those cell phones. You got to take pictures. You got to be, you've got so many great, great tips there. Ralph Velasco, what an absolute joy. So tell us how we can get in touch with you. We want to be able to see your photography. We want to be able to see your trips. We want to see everything about you. How do we do that?
Absolutely. I'm trying to bring everything under the Continental Drifter umbrella. So if you go to continentaldrifter.co, that's my website. You can also find links to my photo enrichment adventures, which specifically are at photoenrichment.com. My a la campagna experiences are at alacampagna.com. You could find me on all the social networks at Ralph Velasco, and also my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and youtube.com/continental drifter, you'll find my channel. And this is something that I created about 9 or 10 months ago, and putting out a video about travel and or photography tips, introducing people to places that I've been to over the years. And I've been doing this, like I said, for 14 years and creating this video content over time and never really knowing what I was going to do with it. But man, am I glad that I did. And I wish I had created more. But what I'm finding is that there's all these little vignettes of places within trips that, experiences, people, foods, whatever, restaurants that I went to, things I tried. I love bread,
Me
and
too.
going to, yeah, seeing how they make bread. It fascinates me that
Excellent.
around the world we can use water, flour, and salt and create just hundreds of different types of
Yeah,
bread.
amazing.
And so that's something that really fascinates me. So I'm trying to share those kinds of experiences with people that they may not have been exposed to, and then hopefully inspire them to get out and do these things as well, and see that it is safe. It's, you're not going to die from eating, that those kinds of things. And so I just love that. To me, that's the best part of travel, is sharing it with others.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, Ralph Velasco, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot, and it was great talking to you. And I'll look forward to continuing watching you out in social media, and maybe eventually even a trip.
Oh, my pleasure. And I saw that you're a private pilot. I've got my private pilot's license too, although I haven't flown in quite a while. But what a great thing to do, huh?
Yeah, I haven't flown in a few years myself, but that was great fun. I was able to get to places. I'm in New England, to Martha's Vineyard and Block Island and Nantucket, to these places very, very quickly. Yeah, it was fun. I appreciate it. Ralph, thanks again. You be well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye bye.